Chapter 12. A Lot of Confabulation. A great wave of delicious chocolate smell hit them as they edged in past the closing door, and there was a charming little old man in an old-fashioned suit with an apron round his fat tummy and a long white beard and whiskers, almost like Father Christmas. He beamed down at the two children and let the door stand open. Oh my. Qu'est-ce que vous désirez? And from the lift of his eyebrows, the children guessed that he was saying, "What do you desire?" Jeremy, panting from the run, managed to stammer out, "A box of chocolates, please, for 4,000 francs." "Oui!" exclaimed Monsieur Bonbon. "Quarter mille francs? That is a very big box of chocolates." And he moved over to the counter, on which there was an endless array of beautiful boxes tied with huge, colorful ribbons. He picked out one. "You like this one? She is mixed up chocolates." Jeremy and Jemima stifled out the desire to giggle at his funny English. But it wasn't difficult to stifle the giggle, for they knew the danger wasn't over yet, and that the terrifying part of the adventure was still to come. "Oh, yes, please," said Jeremy quickly, and at the same time, over Monsieur Bonbon's shoulder, he saw the sly face of Soapy Sam gazing in through the window past all the luscious array of sweets and chocolates. Monsieur Bonbon, who was used to the indecision of children and the time they took to make up their minds, looked rather surprised. But he walked behind the counter to wrap up the box, and Jeremy followed him and held out, with, I admit, a very trembling hand, the 5,000-franc note. Well, Jemima stood behind him, biting her knuckles and almost jumping up and down with excitement. Monsieur Bonbon took the note, and as the children expected, he at once opened it up and felt the holes in it. He looked at them suspiciously, and seeing the urgency and excitement of their faces, and somehow smelling a rat, he lifted the note up to the light and softly spelled out the letters, one by one. "Gangsters!" Jeremy whispered urgently. "Gangsters outside!" And he jerked his head back towards the door. Monsieur Bonbon was suddenly transformed from a delightful old Father Christmas into a man of action. Without a word, he ran, surprisingly quick for an old man, across the shop to the door and bolted and barred it. And then he pressed down quickly on a big lever beside the door, and steel shutters of the stop rattled down outside. But not before the children caught the last glimpse of Soapy Sam's face, now contorted into a furious snarl. Then Monsieur Bonbon darted back behind the counter and picked up the telephone, excitedly shouting a lot of French down it, amongst which Jeremy and Jemima heard the word "police" several times. Then Monsieur Bonbon put the receiver back on the hook and came round and stood looking down at the children for a minute or two. And then he said, "And now, mes enfants, tell me what this is all about." "Yes?" But as Jeremy began to stammer out the story, from outside the street came the familiar warning blare of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang's tremendous klaxon. "Gagooga! Gagooga! Gagooga!" And then a splintering crash of glass and metal and the sounds of shouts and people running. Now what had happened was this. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang had broken all records in her dash from Calais to Paris, and then, almost seemingly to take charge of the steering wheel herself, had finished the trip with a hair-raising sprint through the crowded streets, ignoring traffic lights, police whistles, and the angry shouts of other motorists, as if she knew they were only minutes to spare. Commander Pot clung grimly to the wheel, and Mimsy spent most of the time with her hands over her eyes, as if at any moment they would crash. But then the little radar scanner on the bonnet held steady along one particular stretch of street, and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang slowed down all by herself, as if she were sniffing about, looking for something. And sure enough, as they passed the big sweet shop with the word "Bonbon" in the gold upon it, A low black car dashed suddenly out of a side street, and Commander Pot and Mimsy had just had enough time to recognize it as the gangster car. When Chitty Bang Bang positively wrenched the wheel out from under Commander Pot's hands and tore straight like a charging bull across the street, straight at the black tourer. Chitty Bang Bang hit the black tourer right in its middle with a tremendous crash and a tinkling of glass and knocked it right over on its side, spilling Joe the Monster, Soapy Sam, and Man Mountain Fink out onto the road. And just at that moment, as the gangsters scrambled to their feet to make a run for it, with the sirens screaming, French motorcyclist patrols appeared from both ends of the street and tore down upon them. Commander Pot jumped from the driving seat of the now motionless green car and joined the chase, which now ensued, finally bringing Joe the Monster to the ground with a flying tackle, like you see in rugby football. And then, with the three gangsters lined up and covered with the policemen's revolvers, the door of the sweet shops opened, and the little man looked rather like Father Christmas came running up, followed by Jeremy and Jemima. Well, you can imagine the scenes of happiness and excitement that followed as the twins were reunited with their parents. But then there had to be a lot of confabulation with the police after the French Black Marina had driven up and taken the shouting and cursing gangsters away. But at last, everything had been explained in a mixture of English and French, and many compliments were piled on the shy heads of Jeremy and Jemima for the gallant part they had played in bringing about the capture of the gangsters. Then a police tow truck appeared and hauled the remains of the gangsters' car away, and promised to have Chitty Bang Bang's broken front bumper and bent-in radiator nose put right as quickly as possible. And Monsieur Bonbon and the Pot family watched sympathetically as the great green car was hauled carefully off to a nearby garage, where Commander Pot later visited her to see that she was being properly looked after, and that she hadn't suffered any internal damage as a result of her brave ramming of the black tourer. But she seemed quite happy being attended to by a host of admiring French mechanics, and Commander Pot returned cheerfully to Monsieur Bonbon's house over his shop, where he had insisted that the whole Pot family should first of all have an enormous lunch and be shown some of the sights of Paris, and then spend the night before going off the next day. Madame Bonbon was just as nice as Monsieur Bonbon, and there were two robustious children about the same age as the twins, called Jacques and Jacqueline, and everyone, talking a mixture of bad French and bad English, got on tremendously well together. And the French police paid several visits during the rest of the day and took everybody's statements in writing and announced that the Pot family for the collective efforts in catching the gangsters would be rewarded with no less than 100,000 francs, which is about 800 pounds, which I believe is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 500 bucks. And Madame Bonbon added her own reward, which was to reveal the closely guarded secret of the Bonbon family on how to make bonbon fudge, which is the way she pronounced fudge. And on the next page, I have passed on to you the recipe, which you will find very easy to make and absolutely delicious. And sure enough, as I turn the page, here is a recipe for Monsieur Bonbon's secret fudge. In fact, I'm now going to take a picture of this. I don't know if you heard that or not, but I will post that along with this audio selection. The next morning, after another of those wonderful French breakfasts, Commander Pot went round to the garage, and sure enough, Chitty Bang Bang, although still wearing a slightly battered look, was in splendid order, and came booming around to the bonbon shop, where the whole Bonbon family insisted on being shown every detail of her. Then Monsieur Bonbon beckoned Jeremy and Jemima back into the shop and told them to hold out their arms, and he piled box after box of wonderful sweets and chocolates into them until the twins could barely stand upright. And since the piles of boxes rose higher than their faces, they could hardly see their way to the door and had to be helped as they staggered out to pack their scrumptious presents into the back of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And then there were affectionate farewells all round, and both families promised to keep in touch and visit each other whenever they had a chance. I may say that the families remained firm friends forever after. And then Chitty Chitty Bang Bang went motoring docilely down the street, with a quite different expression on her face than the furious snarl she had worn in the same street the day before. They got out on the open road for Calais, and for either car... Okay, I'm confused. They got out on the open road for Calais, and for either the car ferry or the air bridge to England, they hadn't quite made up their minds which way to go. And Commander Potts said over his shoulder to Jeremy and Jemima, "Well, I think that's quite enough adventure for the time being. It's high time we all went home to peace and quiet." And Mimsy very forcibly said, "I entirely agree." But in the back, Jeremy and Jemima both gave a squawk of protest. "Oh no!" they cried more or less together. "More adventures! More!" And at that, believe it or not, there came a whirring of machinery from somewhere deep down inside Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and the front and back mudguards swiveled out into wings, and the radiator opened up, and the whizzing propeller of the cooling fan slid out, and with a tremendous whoosh, the great green car soared up into the sky. "My hat!" shouted Commander Pot, which was the right thing to shout, as his hat had in fact blown off. "I can't control her! She's taken off! Where in heavens is she taking us?" And to tell you the truth, even I haven't been let in on that secret.